These were not theories from detective novels. They decided who hanged and who walked free. A grid of measurements taken with calipers. A tiny house built to the exact scale of a murder scene. One method sent an innocent man toward death row before it was proven fake. And by the end, another method undid that mistake. Measuring a killer's skull. A card catalog for the human body was the standard for identifying criminals across France by the early 1880s. Alphonse Bertillon, a records clerk in Paris, built the system. 11 measurements of the head, arm, foot, and ear, filed on a card no two men were supposed to share. Police forces from Buenos Aires to Berlin adopted it as the final word on identity. It worked the way a tailor's measurements work. Enough numbers and no two men should fit the same suit. Then, in 1903, an inmate named Will West arrived at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas.
His measurements matched, almost digit for digit, a man already serving a life sentence there. William West, no relation, already in the same prison. Clerks pulled the matching card and stared at two different faces. Historians now argue over how much that one mix-up really pushed Leavenworth toward fingerprinting, rather than just becoming the story everyone remembered afterward. But within a decade, American and European police were filing fingerprints instead of measurements. The card catalog of the human body went into storage, and the system built to make every man countable by numbers gave way to fingerprints instead. The print on the door frame. Juan Vucetich compared two bloody thumbprints under a magnifying glass in a police station in Necochea, Argentina in 1892. A woman named Francisca Rojas had reported that a laborer broke in and killed her two young children. Investigators at the time trusted confessions and eyewitnesses far more than physical evidence. A print on a wall was treated as decoration, not proof. Vucetich had spent years building a filing system based on the ridges and loops on human fingertips, certain that no two people, not even twins, left the same pattern. The same certainty a shoemaker has that no two worn soles wear down identically. He lifted a bloody print from the doorframe of the Rojas house and matched it, ridge for ridge, to Francisca Rojas's own thumb. Confronted with the match, she confessed to killing her children and blaming an innocent man. It became the first criminal conviction in world history secured by a fingerprint. The laborer she accused walked free. Within years, police departments across South America, then Europe, adopted fingerprint filing as standard procedure, built on a method a mother's own hand had proven worked. The mirror that convicted her. In 1836, a British chemist named James Marsh had just watched a poisoner walk free because the courtroom test for arsenic was too crude to convince a jury. Doctors of the era widely believed arsenic was close to the perfect poison, tasteless, dissolved in food, and nearly impossible to prove after death. Marsh built a new test. Pass a suspect sample through zinc and acid, and any arsenic present turns into a gas that leaves a fine, silvery black stain on cold glass, the way a cold window fogs, and holds the shape of a fingertip pressed against it. 4 years later in France, a young widow named Marie Lafarge stood trial for poisoning her husband with arsenic-laced food. Toxicologist Matthew Orfila ran Marsh's test in court and produced the mirror-bright stain on the glass, proof that could be shown to a jury rather than merely described. Lafarge was convicted and sentenced to hard labor. The poison sold for decades as untraceable had just been given a signature it could not scrub off, and courts across Europe began asking prosecutors for the same silver stain before they would convict. A test to save lives. It was sold as a way to keep patients alive on the operating table. Investigators only later borrowed it to help clear a man who had already been hanged. Karl Landsteiner, a physician in Vienna, discovered in 1901 that human blood came in distinct types, and mixing the wrong ones caused blood to clump, the same way milk curdles the instant lemon juice hits it. Surgeons adopted blood typing to make transfusions safe. Investigators eventually borrowed blood typing to narrow suspects at a crime scene, matching blood type instead of a face. In London in 1950, a 25-year-old laborer named Timothy Evans was hanged for the murder of his wife and infant daughter. Years later, blood typing evidence recovered from the scene pointed instead to his landlord, John Christie, who was later convicted of a string of murders in the same building. Evans received a posthumous pardon in 1966. The case became one of the most cited examples in Britain's campaign to end capital punishment, and the country abolished the death penalty for murder in 1965, a law built partly on a test invented to save lives in surgery, not take them away by mistake. The insects who knew the date. Every investigator in 1850s France believed a body's age could only be guessed by how far decay had spread, a method about as precise as guessing a season by touching a leaf. In 1855, a French physician named Bergeret was called to a house in Paris where workers found the mummified body of an infant sealed behind a fireplace mantel.
Several families had lived in the house across different years, and each denied any connection to the child. Bergeret examined the insect remains still clinging to the body. Flies arrive first, then a set order of beetles and moths follows over months and years, the way growth rings inside a cut tree trunk mark off one season after another. The insect stages told him the child had been sealed behind that wall years before the most recent family moved in, ruling them out and narrowing the case to an earlier tenant. It became the founding case of forensic entomology, cited by investigators for generations afterward. A body that decay alone made impossible to date had, in the end, kept its own calendar running the entire time, written in the insects nobody had thought to examine. 18 rooms, built to kill. Frances Glessner Lee built her first miniature crime scene in her 70s, after decades of watching local police and coroners trample through real ones. Investigators in the 1940s were rarely trained. A scene was often disturbed, misread, or lost within the first hour, because whoever arrived first assumed the story was obvious. Lee, a wealthy heiress barred from studying medicine at Harvard for being a woman, built the university a department of legal medicine instead and funded it herself. Then she built 18 dollhouses of death, rooms built to the exact scale sold in any toy store, 1 inch standing for 1 foot, with hand-knit stockings, working locks, and blood mixed to the precise shade and thickness of the real thing. Each nutshell recreated a composite of real solved cases, stripped of names. Police captains sent to Harvard for training got 90 minutes to study a room and state a cause of death. Most got it wrong, and that failure was the entire lesson. Slow down, touch nothing, assume nothing. Lee was later sworn in as the first woman police captain in the United States. Her nutshells are still used to train homicide investigators today, unsolved by design. A scratch no other gun shares. A scratch pattern on a fired bullet is as specific to the gun that fired it as a key cut for one lock, unable to turn any other.
On February 14, 1929, 7 men were shot dead in a Chicago garage, machine-gunned by attackers dressed as police officers, in what newspapers called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Courts at the time had no reliable way to prove which weapon fired which bullet. Ballistics testimony was often little more than a firearms dealer's opinion. Colonel Calvin Goddard, a physician turned forensic examiner, used a comparison microscope he had helped refine to view 2 bullets side by side under identical light, matching the scratches left by each gun's barrel. He tested the recovered shells against Chicago Police Department weapons, clearing the department of direct involvement in the killings. The murder weapons themselves surfaced 10 months later, in December of that same year, locked in an upstairs closet at a Michigan house rented by a fugitive using the name Fred Dane, in reality, the gangster Fred Burke. Goddard's comparison microscope matched the Thompson guns found there to shells from the massacre. No one was ever convicted for the killings, but the method that identified the guns became standard courtroom evidence in the years that followed. The machine that doubted itself. John Larson wired a rubber tube and a blood pressure cuff to a suspect in a Berkeley, California police station in 1921, convinced that lying under pressure left a physical signature the body could not hide. Investigators of the era believed deception raised blood pressure, pulse, and breathing in a pattern truth never produced, and Larson's device recorded all 3 continuously on a moving roll of paper, the way a seismograph needle traces a tremor too small for anyone to feel. Within a few years, interrogation rooms across the country carried the same rubber tube and cuff as standard equipment, and a spike in the ink line was treated as close to a confession.
Larson himself grew more doubtful the longer he used it, watching innocent people spike on the chart and guilty ones stay calm. By the end of his career, he called his own invention a fraud, warning that fear and confidence could fool the machine as easily as guilt or innocence could. American courts never fully accepted polygraph results as proof of guilt, largely because the man who built the machine spent his later years arguing, loudly and often, that it never worked the way it was marketed. The bite that wasn't his. Investigators in Phoenix, Arizona believed in 1992 that a human bite mark was as individual as a fingerprint, distinct enough on its own to send a man to death row. A dental expert compared a bite mark found on a murder victim's body to a mold of Ray Krone's teeth and testified in court that the match was certain, a case the press soon nicknamed the Snaggletooth Killer.
Krone, a postal worker in his mid-30s with no criminal record, was convicted and sentenced to death. The method assumed skin holds a bite mark the way wax holds a stamp, but skin stretches and heals like bread dough springing back after a cookie cutter lifts away, distorting under swelling, movement, and time, until dozens of different sets of teeth could plausibly fit the same mark. Krone spent 10 years in prison, several of them on death row, before DNA testing in 2002 identified the saliva on the victim as belonging to a different man entirely, Kenneth Phillips, already serving time for an unrelated attack. Krone was exonerated and released. The method that convicted him, treated for years as reliable as a fingerprint, has since been discredited in case after case where it convicted the wrong man. DNA's first verdict.
In 1984, a geneticist named Alec Jeffreys was studying inherited disease markers in his lab at the University of Leicester when he noticed that certain sequences in human DNA repeated the way a barcode stripes repeat, unique to one person, the way no two products on a shelf share the same code. 2 years later, English police investigating the murders of 2 teenage girls near the village of Enderby asked Jeffreys to test his new method on a suspect who had already confessed. The DNA did not match the confession. Investigators then ran what became the world's first mass genetic screening, testing blood from thousands of local men, until a bakery worker named Colin Pitchfork was found to have paid a coworker to submit a sample in his place. Once caught, Pitchfork's own DNA matched the crime scene exactly. And in 1988, at 27 years old, he became the first person in the world convicted of murder using DNA evidence. The same technology had already cleared the falsely confessed suspect before Pitchfork was ever identified, and it would go on, case after case, to clear people convicted by methods that had only ever looked scientific, including the one already on this list. Which of these methods would you have trusted? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more forgotten history.